First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia. Identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia. Identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. On the morning that I spoke to Kyle Chayka, I dropped my son off at preschool and stopped to get some coffee on the way to work. And I wanted Kyle to try to guess what the coffee shop that I went to looked like. I wondered if that was something he could do.
I think so. I mean, I'm going to use my mental magician powers and say that there were some hanging pendant lamps that may have had Edison bulbs in them. There might have been some white subway tiles on the wall behind the counter, which might be like a nice marble or even concrete if it's really cool. Some nice reclaimed wood furniture or some vintage mid-century pieces that make you feel like you're in a nice hotel from 1955. And then probably some nice ceramic cups that your cappuccino comes in.
It was a latte to go, but the rest of this description is pretty spot on. Because Kyle has thought a lot about what particular signifiers a coffee shop today might possess. He's a staff writer at The New Yorker and has just written the book Filterworld: How Algorithms Flattened Culture. In one part of the book, Kyle talks about how whenever he was traveling, he would type hipster coffee shop into Yelp and Google Maps.
Hipster, in the 2010s at least, was the signifier of kind of millennial era consumerism and taste. And the coffee shops all had to kind of project their image online through these apps like Yelp or Google Maps. So it was a kind of like index. I could use the phrase through the search algorithm, through Yelp's rankings and star ratings to find exactly what I was looking for.
When you wrote about this phenomenon in 2016, you called it airspace. What does that mean?
At the time, I used that word airspace to talk about the style that was happening, like the generic minimalist white subway tile, mid-century furniture thing. And I was seeing that not just in coffee shops, but in co-working spaces and restaurants and hotels and kind of like the whole new geography that was popping up with the sharing economy.
When readers saw the term airspace, they knew exactly what Kyle meant and started emailing him pictures of coffee shops and hotel lobbies that hewed to this same shareable aesthetic.
It was a geography and a physical space that had a lot in common with the digital spaces that we're in. It was kind of like interconnected and driven by the internet.
Was there a point in which you realized, oh, this is more than this design phenomenon of coffee shops and WeWorks and what have you, that you realized, I think this is rippling out into something bigger?
Yeah, to me, the coffee shop aesthetic was kind of the canary in the coal mine. Like it was the most visible symbol of this homogenization that was happening over the internet. So there was that design, right? Like it was a cliche, stereotypical design that I think a lot of people can observe. And it became a cliche. It was boring. You can kind of see it everywhere. But I think the reality of it, the source of it, ran much deeper.
It ran, Kyle says, to a handful of tech companies creating a larger handful of algorithms that drove our behavior, whether we knew it or not.
And it wasn't just about one style, but this deeper homogenization and sameness that was creeping into a lot of different spaces, driven by the Instagram feed, and now the TikTok feed, and Netflix streaming, and Spotify recommendations. It was kind of this aesthetic that spread everywhere via the feeds.
Today on the show, are we living in Filterworld? A place where algorithms, not people, decide what we like. I'm Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around. Reboot your credit card with Apple Card. It gives you unlimited daily cash back that can earn 4.35% annual percentage yield when you open a savings account. A high-yield, low-effort way to grow your money with no fees. Apply for Apple Card now in the Wallet app on iPhone to start earning and growing your daily cash with savings today. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA. Member FDIC. Terms apply. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia. Identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. Kyle describes Filterworld as the vast, interlocking, and yet diffuse network of algorithms that influence our lives today. And while you may have thought of that in terms of politics, how Facebook tends to surface outrageous election content, for example, Kyle's book focuses on culture and how, he says, the world of algorithmic recommendations favors a certain kind of culture. Things that are easier, less challenging to digest, made for sharing and recommending over and over and over. I want you to try to describe Filterworld as a place to me. What are its defining characteristics? Like, if you're an inhabitant of Filterworld, what is your experience?
It's almost like being a rat in a maze. Like you are surrounded, or we are surrounded as internet users by all of these different algorithmic systems. And we're constantly being guided in one direction or another by recommendations. So Spotify is pushing a song at you, or Netflix is pushing a new TV show. So I think as an inhabitant of Filterworld, we're kind of just immersed in this like bubble of our own desires, or a projection of our own desires that come to us through digital platforms. I use the word filter because these feeds and recommendations are a kind of filter. Like, they sort content for you. They try to guide you towards something that fits with your taste. But I think that becomes like an inescapable environment. Like, it's a scrim or a filter that you can't actually see through, that blocks you from experiencing other things.
One of the parts of the book that I found really interesting was this moment where you describe a shift from chronological feeds, sort of the infancy of social media, to algorithmic recommendations. When do you start to pinpoint that shift?
Yeah, I think there really was a shift over the course of the 2010s. Like when we all got on social media, when social networks were beginning to be popular in, say, like the late 2000s and early 2010s, most of the feeds there were linear, meaning that they were chronologically ordered. You saw the posts that were posted most recently, and then you saw the older ones. And that's just how all content was treated. And then there's this kind of watershed moment around 2015, 2016, where tech companies decided to make the feeds more algorithmic, to mix in a greater proportion of recommendations versus things you chose to follow. And that happened with the Facebook feed. It happened with Instagram recommendations. It happened with the Netflix homepage. they all kind of move toward sorting content for you rather than letting you choose exactly what you were going to see.
That has been covered fairly relentlessly in the media, talking about the 2016 election and Facebook showing, more inflammatory content, for example, things that are more likely to provoke an emotional response, getting boosted by the algorithm, et cetera. But you focus so much on culture and taste. That is the heart of this book. And there is a quote in which you say the overall digital environment is dictated by tech companies with ruthlessly capitalist expansionary motives, which do not provide the most fertile ground for culture.
Sounds bad.
It does sound bad. But I want examples of that. I want to understand where you see Filterworld sanding off the difficult edges of art or movies or music.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the issues of Filterworld is just that so much of our consumption of culture has become mediated by these feeds. Like, whenever we want to listen to a song, we're on Spotify and getting kind of redirected by the platform. Whenever we want to watch a TV show or film, we are like not just choosing what to see, but experiencing the recommendations of Netflix. So I think our consumption is being guided in manipulative ways. For one example, Netflix changes the thumbnails of the shows it presents to you based on what it sees as your personal taste. So not only is the selection of content on there changed, but actually how it's presented to you. And so if you're a person who, say, only watches rom-coms, but Netflix wants to push you toward a sports documentary or something, it might show you an image that leads you to think a sports documentary is a rom-com. And that, like, it kind of fools you into not thinking about your own taste and into consuming something that doesn't necessarily appeal to you. On the creator side, because all of our attention is so mediated by these feeds, creators, like artists, musicians, designers, whoever, have to tailor their work in a way that works for the feed. And I mean, you see that on TikTok, where music producers focus on making sound bites that are like 10 seconds long, that are so densely packed with sound and drama that you just instantly stick in your head, and they're repeatable infinitely. And I mean, in one case in the book, I spoke with an illustrator friend of mine, Hallie Bateman, who kind of experienced this algorithmic pressure on Instagram when she started doing this series of drawings of just like little self-help commandments or suggestions on brightly colored construction paper. And immediately that work blew up on Instagram. Like, that became her most successful project ever. She was getting tons of followers. But then she also experienced this pressure to keep doing that, to like serve the audience that was only coming to her for that thing. And for her, it felt like that was just a distortion of her own creative practice. Like, that's not what she wanted to be known for. That's not what she wanted to chase in a way to keep her audience's attention.
And I guess that makes sense if you are thinking about someone who is gaining fame or gaining followers or gaining money from existing on the internet. But there's a section of the book where you seem to posit, and I want to dig into this, that it goes deeper than that the popularity of a Sheila Heti or a Nausgaard or this sort of like particular kind of autofiction is what? Is the rise of these books because we are used to viewing the world in an Instagram protagonist way?
I mean, Instagram and other feeds have really shaped how we see everything in the world. Like, all forms of culture has to kind of flow through them. And in the case of autofiction, my book was kind of responding to this academic Mark McGurl's work on Amazon, the like algorithmic marketplace of books that exists on there. And he argued that Amazon and algorithmic recommendations kind of slot authors into very specific genres of stuff, whether that's like romance or fantasy or something like autofiction, which has kind of become a dominant literary mode. And to me, the way that autofiction resonates with Instagram is that we want the author to be a kind of influencer. Like, we want to know about the author's life. We want to know what kinds of coffee shops they're going to. We want to know what's in their home. We want to kind of consume their lifestyle in a way as much as we consume their work of literature itself. So I think there's a resonance with how autofiction plays with like the presentation of the self and authenticity in the same way that like an influencer on Instagram kind of presents some of their self and like shows off some of their real identity, but then it's also kind of inauthentic and artificial as well.
I talked to some of my colleagues about this and sort of said, like, do you see experience as a flattened culture? And one question that came back to them was like, but isn't it kind of fun and cool to learn about cottagecore, gremlincore, dark academia? Like, even if these are like weird flash in the pan things that circulate via social media, they seem organic, no? Not prescribed by Anna Wintour on high.
Yeah, I think there's this bottom-up generation of culture that is really interesting online. Like, I think these digital platforms highlight a ton of interesting stuff, and they allow us to experience the breadths of what everyone makes. Like, there are fewer gatekeepers. And I love exploring that field, like gremlincore or like coastal grandmother aesthetic, like whatever the one is that we're talking about this week or month. It's always fun to know. But I think what becomes overwhelming is like the specificity and speed that these things emerge and pass by with. Like all of a sudden, everyone is talking about mob wife core or something. That's the one I've been seeing this week.
TikTok has spoken, the clean girl aesthetic is out, and the mob wife aesthetic is in. I am so excited. It's time for the fur coats. It's time for the makeup girlies. It's time for serious all black leather outfits. This is everything. I want dramatic. I want maximalism. So let's talk about how to dress like this and what it means.
And it's just like the trends percolate up and then pass by so quickly that you almost don't have a chance to actually engage with what the content is there. Like, to me, it creates this atmosphere in which there's more pressure to keep up with a thing that's new and the thing that's like going viral this second than there is to really like go deep in a single one of these areas. So I worry that it's almost like too much flavor of the week and we're not allowing ourselves to think slower thoughts and like develop a different sense of identity. I mean, I contrast kind of the flash in the pan, coastal grandmother, etc., cottagecore trend on TikTok with like maybe a more long-term cultural identity like punks or goths or, even the hipster in a way was like produced a more meaningful body of culture than just this instant adaptation to an aesthetic that then passes by when it no longer gets engagement.
When we come back, the anxiety that comes from not knowing what the algorithms are going to do with us. This episode is brought to you by Splunk. You need to keep operations humming around the clock, but potential disruptions are everywhere. Splunk helps you predict problems and find and fix issues fast so you can reduce risk and ditch downtime. The world's largest enterprises rely on Splunk's unified security and observability platform to become more efficient, resilient, and innovative. With Splunk, you can react quickly, evolve faster, and be ready for anything. Stay ahead of disruptions. Learn more at splunk.com/resilience.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Hey listeners, whether you love true crime or comedies, celebrity interviews, news, or even motivational speakers, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue, right? And guess what? Now you can call the shots on your auto insurance too. Enter the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. The Name Your Price tool puts you in charge of your auto insurance by working just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, then they'll show you a variety of coverages that fit within your budget, giving you options. Now that's something you'll want to press play on. It's easy to start a quote, and you'll be able to choose the best option for you, fast. It's just one of the many ways you can save with Progressive Insurance. Quote today at Progressive.com to try the Name Your Price tool for yourself and join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
This episode is brought to you by Splunk. You need to keep operations humming around the clock, but potential disruptions are everywhere. Splunk helps you predict problems and find and fix issues fast so you can reduce risk and ditch downtime. The world's largest enterprises rely on Splunk's unified security and observability platform to become more efficient, resilient, and innovative. With Splunk, you can react quickly, evolve faster, and be ready for anything. Stay ahead of disruptions. Learn more at splunk.com/resilience. In one of the most fascinating sections of the book, Kyle writes about something called algorithmic anxiety. Because by now, we all know that algorithms are affecting our lives, but we don't always know exactly how. The term itself was coined by an academic to describe the way Airbnb hosts tried to alter their property listings to appeal to the company's search algorithm, changing the photos of their listings or describing them with slightly different keywords so they would be shown to more potential renters.
And these things didn't actually work. Like, they were just strategies of coping with the unknowability of that digital platform. And I think we all kind of experience that unknowability. Like, we don't know what the TikTok feed is thinking of us. We don't know exactly how the Netflix homepage works. And so we're constantly negotiating with how our behaviors are being perceived by the technology, what signals we're sending or not sending. And I think we also feel anxiety because we can't talk back to these systems. Like, they exert so much power over us and we exist through them so often, but we can't change how the X algorithm works. We can't tell Netflix to stop recommending one thing or another.
Right. I have no idea how Spotify is going to put this podcast up today, right? It could display it prominently or not.
Right. And those are technological systems that we just don't have any agency over. And no human does in a way, because they are quite black box systems that are operating at a scale that is beyond any one person. There maybe is not a person choosing to highlight one Spotify song or another. It's just what's popular and what gets automatically recommended.
But I think what I struggle with is the human response to that, right? Like, you talk about this woman who bought leg warmers because she saw a bunch of influencers buy leg warmers. And it seemed to really inspire like a crisis of confidence in her, that she sort of felt like she didn't know who she was and she couldn't figure out her own style or identity. And maybe this is because I'm 48, but I read that section of the book and thought, why are you letting this do this to you? Just wear what you want to wear. Who cares what the internet thinks?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds so simple, like to just say, oh, well, think about what you like. Don't kind of separate yourself from the feeds. But I mean, as a millennial and talking to a lot of younger people, like Gen Z people on TikTok particularly, their identity is almost more manipulated by the feeds online. Like, they have experienced this for more of their lives. Their tastes or preferences were already developed within these systems. And so I think there's a sense in which they haven't learned to distrust them, or for a long time it's worked and shown them what they did like, or they believed it showed them what they liked. And thus they trusted the feed more than they might trust a human tastemaker. They haven't had those kinds of conversations or developed like almost the skill of thinking about what you as a person like, as opposed to what's popular.
I mean, to me, that feels extraordinarily naive.
I mean, tech companies have occupied so much of our mental landscape in a way. Like, the more online you are, the more you're influenced by these systems. And so I think it is easy to forget that there's a world outside of that, to forget that you can figure out what you like, not on the TikTok feed, not just chase what influencers are doing or what Twitter pushes at you. So that same woman, Valerie Peter, she was on Twitter or on X and was looking up astrology content and had been interested in it for a while. But all of a sudden she got bombarded with all of this astrology that she then started to dislike and felt like kind of misled or anxious about getting. But she couldn't tell Twitter to stop giving her this content. Like, she couldn't send a strong enough signal to stay away from the astrology. And I feel like it it shows in a way how the feeds direct you in ways that you don't necessarily like.
You bring me to the idea of pushing back, and I feel like there are sort of two buckets there, right? One is on the individual level, and one is on the societal or regulatory level. The final chapter in this book is about your algorithmic cleanse or algorithm cleanse. Tell me about that.
I wanted to do a kind of algorithm cleanse, like almost like a diet or like a, giving up something for Lent or dry January, like just getting outside of the feeds, in part because I just become so overwhelmed with them. Like I am as online as anyone. I was on X for work. I was looking at Instagram all the time. And so I kind of decided that the only way I could truly see who I was without these things was to just get off them for a while. And so I deleted everything from my phone, logged off all of the apps, and I was kind of confronted with this sudden silence of the absence of the feeds and the absence of these 1,000 posts a day that I was used to consuming. But I think like cutting that stuff off and going cold turkey did kind of reframe how I think about digital platforms. And it reminded me in a way that you don't need them, that there's like a world outside of what gets recommended to you. And I think it lessened that algorithmic anxiety simply because I didn't have to contend with this image of myself that existed online that I was constantly being manipulated by.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit that there's a part of me that was like, dude, just log off.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Well, that brings me to the macro stuff. I mean, and this is where I think you get to some of the most interesting parts of the book, is that perhaps culture and society is being manipulated even if you have logged off, even if you are not a part of this on a micro level, even if you're Marty Scorsese, you feel the influence of these companies. And it makes me wonder if this is a question of algorithmic influence or monopolistic influence. If there were 500 companies driving social media feeds, would it be different?
I think it would be. I mean, as users, we kind of feel that we don't have that much choice of what we experience. Like Meta as a company owns Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, which are like 3 of the biggest platforms in the world. So even if you are not on those platforms, the actions and decisions of billions of people around the world are being guided by them. So that impacts what kinds of music gets made. It impacts what films get produced to respond to the Martin Scorsese concern. It influences how restaurants advertise themselves and what kinds of dishes they put on their menus. Because even if you don't care about how something looks on TikTok, a lot of other people will. So I think we are all kind of living in this world shaped by algorithmic recommendations. And I think increased competition, like if we can break down the monopolies of Meta and Google, would actually lead to a wider diversity of experiences. Like we could change how algorithmic feeds work, perhaps, or we could drift to different flavors of platforms that might better serve our personal preferences. At the end of writing this book and like in talking about it, it just strikes me so much that the idea that 1 billion people should be on one digital platform and all being pushed through the same pipes in a way is deeply disturbing. Like that's the biggest homogenizing force almost that we've ever seen in human experience. And it just is kind of gross to me at this point.
So then let's talk policy. You talk a bit about Section 230, which basically inures companies to, legal action about the content on their platforms. What would you like to see? I realize that you write about culture, that you're not a policy reporter, but it does come up.
In the United States, we've had a really hard time passing any regulation on social media just because there isn't fully the political willpower, and the platforms themselves have become so dominant. They spend so much money on lobbying. But like if you look outside of the US at European Union regulation, they are actively putting laws into place that give users rights to their data, for example.
Yeah.
or give you the ability to opt out of surveillance. Or even with the more recent Digital Services Act in the EU, it mandates that you can opt out of algorithmic feeds. Like, if you don't want to experience recommendations, you will have the option to not do that. And that's almost unthinkable in the United States right now. You see the platforms kind of responding to those regulations and changing how they work for everyone, because
it's easier for them to just make one big change.
Yes, yeah. But I think actual regulation in the United States where these companies exist could accomplish a lot more and just give us more options for how we live online.
How should one arrive at the idea of taste and culture? Because you talk a lot about, the local DJ or the art critic or whatever. But, I think about going to the movies in the early 90s, and my family had this joke about our movie theater as the Bethesda monoculture, that it catered to, upper middle class white people. And those were the tastes that spread society wide. And so, like, the democratizing aspects of the internet are incredible. I worry that if we go the other way, it's racist, it's classist, it's sexist, that you're subject to the taste of just a handful of people.
Yeah, there were these gatekeepers in the past, like these human gatekeepers.
Well, and there still are.
Yeah. And now I think we have this algorithmic gatekeeping mechanism, but we do have the total democratization of publishing and of allowing anyone to put something online and access an audience. And I think that's amazing and like really a positive force in culture. What I don't like is the total domination of algorithmic gatekeeping in a way. Like, anyone can put something online, but that doesn't guarantee that you're going to get an audience for it. You don't have a right to other people's attention. And algorithmic feeds push people's attention toward a very specific set of content that works for the platforms, that sparks the right kinds of reaction in people. So I think, we gain something in the system, in the ecosystem of the internet, that anyone can put something out there, but we also lose it with just the sheer extent that our attention is directed by algorithmic feeds. We're not just seeing everything that everyone puts out there. And from the perspective of creators, like the independent kid who might upload music to Spotify literally put into place a new rule that they are not going to monetarily reward any song under 1,000 streams. So that essentially argues that if you can't reach over 1,000 streams, if you can't game the system and get an audience, then your art is literally worthless, that you shouldn't get rewarded for it. And that means you can't make it in the future. Like, I think this algorithmic ecosystem is unsustainable for the production of culture.
That makes me wonder how much of this might be transient, either because as a consumer, you age out, right? You reach a point and you just think like, this is who I am, and I'm okay with that. Or because if you're a younger person and you've been brought up with this, you're pretty savvy. Like, you might start to question what the algorithm is doing. Did you find any points in your reporting process where you thought, like, maybe I'm capturing a moment in time, but it's not always going to be this way?
Yeah. I mean, the internet changes so much that one fear I had in writing the book was just that I would be capturing something that wasn't relevant anymore, that had like disappeared and faded into the ether. And I think change has happened a bit slower than I expected. I think the way that I framed the book, or the way that I think about it now, is that it's about the internet of the 2010s. It's about how a certain ecosystem evolved, how we responded as consumers to it, how digital platforms developed to be the way they are. And now I kind of see the ennui and the anxiety growing to the point that people are rebelling against these systems and looking really intentionally for alternatives. I don't think the alternatives exist yet necessarily, like in part due to the lack of monopoly regulation and things like that. but there's a desire for a new internet. There's like a desire to not exist in this filter world and to move beyond it. And I think by the end of the book, like when I finished writing a year or so ago, I started to watch Twitter fall apart under Elon Musk. I started to see the, Facebook scrambling and trying to do the metaverse. Like that didn't work either. So I think by the tail end, I got the sense that we're like moving out of a phase of the internet that happened. But that phase dictated so much of what culture was popular in the past, 8 to 10 years.
Does that leave you hopeful?
Yes, it does. I mean, the internet's always changing. Like there's always new things popping up and new mechanisms and experiments to try. And like human creativity, there's no death of culture here. There's no end to the human desire to make art and to make original stuff. I just think the digital ecosystem could support that more. And what I'm hopeful for is like different kinds of platforms that are more sustainable, both for our attention and for the careers of the artists and creators.
Chayka, thank you so much for coming on and spending this time with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chayka is a staff writer at The New Yorker and the author of Filterworld, How Algorithms Flattened Culture. And that is it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell, Anna Phillips, and Patrick Ford. Our show is edited by Mia Armstrong-Lopez. Alicia Montgomery is vice president of audio for Slate, and TBD is part of the larger What Next family. We're also part of Future Tense, a partnership of Slate, Arizona State University, and New America. And if you are a fan of this show, I have a little request for you. Become a Slate Plus member. Just head on over to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. All right, we will be back next week with more episodes. I'm Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks for listening.